In 1922, Howard Carter broke through a sealed door in the Valley of the Kings. What he found inside stopped him cold. Gold everywhere. Thousands of artifacts. A king untouched for 3,000 years. The world went insane. Tutankhamun's tomb became the greatest archaeological discovery in history. But here's what nobody tells you. The moment Carter walked out of that tomb, one question hung in the air. One name that kept every Egyptologist awake for the next 100 years. Where was Thutmose II? Egypt's 18th dynasty had produced some of history's most powerful pharaohs. Ramesses, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut. Their tombs had all been found. Every single one. Except his, for 103 years. Thutmose II simply did not exist. Archaeologists searched, they mapped, they dug, nothing. Some began to wonder if the tomb had been destroyed. Others thought it had been hidden deliberately. A few quietly whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was never built at all. Let me tell you who Thutmose II actually was, because most people have never heard his name, and that's exactly the problem. He ruled Egypt around 1500 BC, fourth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. At the height of Egypt's power, his wife and half-sister was Hatshepsut, one of the most extraordinary rulers in human history. Hatshepsut didn't just marry a pharaoh, she became one. After Thutmose II died, she ruled Egypt for over 20 years, as king, not queen. King. She wore the male pharaoh's headdress. She wore the false beard. She commanded armies. She built monuments. And somewhere in all of this, she buried her husband, but where? Here's what we knew. Thutmose II died young, possibly in his 20s. His reign was short, perhaps 13 years. He left behind a son who would become Thutmose III, one of Egypt's greatest warrior pharaohs, but the father, forgotten. His mummy was supposedly found in a cache of royal bodies in 1881, or so everyone thought. That mummy, the one labeled Thutmose II, has haunted Egyptologists for decades, because it's the body of a man around 30 years old. But Thutmose II almost certainly died younger. Was it really him? Or had someone, at some point in the 3,000 years between his death and 1881, made a catastrophic mistake? October 2022. A Scottish archaeologist named Piers Litherland was digging in a remote valley 2.5 kilometers west of the Valley of the Kings. Not in the valley itself, off to the side, in a place where nobody expected to find a pharaoh. They found an entrance, a descending corridor. The architecture suggested royalty, but the location suggested a queen. It was close to the tombs of Thutmose III's wives, close to where Hatshepsut had originally planned to be buried. So the team logged it as a possible royal consort's tomb and kept digging. The plaster on the ceiling had survived, blue, dotted with yellow stars. In ancient Egypt, a star ceiling meant one thing and one thing only: royalty. Not a wife, not a servant, a king. Litherland's team had been wrong about what they found. They hadn't found a queen's tomb. They had found a pharaoh on the fragments of fallen wall, pieces of the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld, a sacred royal text, reserved exclusively for pharaohs. It described the sun's journey through the night, 12 hours of darkness before the resurrection at dawn. Only a king could be buried with this text. Only a king. Then came the proof. Buried in the debris, fragments of alabaster jars, and on one of them an inscription. The translation stopped the team cold. It read, "The god's wife, the great chief wife Hatshepsut, made this monument for her brother, the perfect god, the lord of the two lands, Thutmose II, given life enduringly." Hatshepsut had buried him here, not in the Valley of the Kings, in this hidden valley 2.5 kilometers away, in a tomb that looked like it belonged to a wife. And she had left a message on an alabaster jar identifying him. A message that waited 3,500 years for someone to read it. When Piers Litherland walked out of that chamber, his wife was waiting outside. He burst into tears. "When you come across something you're not expecting to find," he said, "it's emotionally extremely turbulent." He had spent years in this desert, and he had found what 100 years of archaeology could not. February 19th, 2025. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities made the announcement. The first royal tomb discovered since Tutankhamun. 103 years. Thutmose II had finally been found. The world reacted exactly as you'd expect. Headlines everywhere. But underneath the celebration, the questions were already forming. Because finding the tomb was only the beginning. What was inside told a far more disturbing story. The tomb was largely empty. Not robbed, empty. The burial goods had been removed. Deliberately, carefully. Someone, at some point in ancient times, had come into this tomb and taken almost everything. The mummy was gone. The sarcophagus was gone. The canopic jars were gone. Only fragments remained. Tomb robbery was common in ancient Egypt, but this felt different. The removal of objects seemed too organized, too complete. This wasn't a robbery, this was a transfer. Someone had moved Thutmose II, deliberately, carefully. But who? And where? And why? The answer almost certainly leads back to Hatshepsut. She buried him here. She wrote the inscription, and Egyptologists now believe she, or someone acting under her orders, later moved his remains. The question is why? Why bury him outside the Valley of the Kings in the first place, and why move him again? Here's what we know. When Thutmose II died, Hatshepsut became regent for his young son, and then she became pharaoh. She wore the male headdress, the false beard. She commanded armies. She ruled Egypt for over 20 years as king. And when Thutmose III finally took full power, he tried to erase her, removing her images, plastering over her name. He wanted history to show no female pharaoh existed between his father and himself. In this context, the location of Thutmose II's tomb takes on new meaning. Was Hatshepsut protecting him, or hiding something about his death? The official records describe him as weak. Short reign, little achievement. But those records were written by people who came after. People with reasons of their own to diminish his legacy. What if the story we've been told was constructed by winners? These are the questions serious Egyptologists are now asking. Because this discovery has opened more doors than it has closed. A pharaoh hidden outside the main valley. A tomb found deliberately empty. A mummy that may not be his. And a second inscription, written by the most powerful woman in Egyptian history, that raises more questions than it answers. Then came the most extraordinary development. Just days after the announcement, Litherland hinted at something that had the archaeological world buzzing. The mummy long assumed to be Thutmose II, found in 1881, shows a man of around 30 years old. But everything we know about Thutmose II suggests he died younger, which means that mummy may not be his, which means his actual mummy is still out there, somewhere, unfound, and Litherland thinks he knows where. He believes he may have identified a second tomb, a second possible resting place for Thutmose II. Intact, untouched, waiting in the desert. If he is right, what waits inside could rewrite everything we think we know about this forgotten pharaoh and the extraordinary woman who buried him. If that second tomb exists, and if it is intact, it could be the most significant discovery since Tutankhamun himself. Not just another pharaoh, but the answer to 100 years of questions. Where is Thutmose II? What happened to his burial goods? Why was he hidden? And what did Hatshepsut know or want to hide about the man she called her brother and her king? Archaeology moves slowly. The excavation of this tomb will take years. The search for a possible second tomb will take longer. The answers, if they come at all, will come in fragments. Like the alabaster jar that started everything. Piece by piece. Inscription by inscription. Year by year. But here is what we know right now. A Scottish archaeologist stood in a hidden valley west of Luxor, read an inscription on a broken jar, and heard the voice of Hatshepsut, speaking across 3,500 years, telling him exactly where she had buried her husband. The Valley of the Kings kept it secret for 103 years, and when it finally gave it up, it gave us not closure, but a deeper mystery. A pharaoh whose tomb was found empty, a mummy that may not be his, a second tomb that may be waiting, and a queen who arranged all of it and left only one sentence behind. 3,500 years of silence and one sentence. The god's wife Hatshepsut made this monument for her brother, the perfect god, Thutmose II. The greatest discoveries in archaeology are never endings. They are beginnings. Thutmose II's tomb is the beginning of a story only now being told. The second tomb, the real mummy, the truth about what Hatshepsut knew and why she hid it. That chapter has not been written yet. We found his tomb. We heard her message. Now we have to find him.